World News, and Somalia's government says it's cancelled all agreements with the United Arab Emirates. Tensions have been increasing since Israel recognized the breakaway region of Somaliland. Somali media report that the UAE played a role in that recognition.
Help us understand why the Somali government is taking this step.
Well, it has gotten to a point where the Somali national existence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity have been violated by the United Arab Emirates, which has been there for a long time, invested in several sectors of the country, and had its own security infrastructure, which really enabled the UAE to smuggle somebody that Somalia was not aware of. So that probably was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Starting with Somalia, the country has ended all agreements with the UAE. This includes all port deals and security and defence cooperation agreements. Somalia said that the decision was made to protect its national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
So I think in conclusion, yes, I think the government was justified. There seems to be a realignment by the Somali government. There's been a mixed relationship between the government and the UAE over the past 3-4 years, but this was really, I think, the straw that broke the camel's back.
Somalia has cancelled all agreements with the United Arab Emirates, citing what it called strong evidence of actions undermining the country's sovereignty and unity.
No press conference, no warning, just a decision that sent shockwaves through global trade routes. Somalia has just cut off way control over its ports, quietly ending deals that gave a foreign power influence over some of the most strategic shipping lanes in Africa. This wasn't paperwork, this wasn't routine politics, ports mean power, and this move just redrew the balance in the Horn of Africa. The question isn't why it happened. The question is who loses control next. For years, Somalia was spoken about as a place where decisions happened elsewhere. Contracts were signed abroad. Security guarantees were shaped by outsiders. Infrastructure deals were negotiated with limited leverage. The assumption was simple. Somalia needed partners more than partners needed Somalia. That assumption just collapsed. When the Somali government moved to cancel port agreements involving the United Arab Emirates, it wasn't reacting to a single dispute. It was making a statement about authority, one that challenges how power has been distributed across the Horn of Africa for over a decade. To understand why this decision matters, you have to understand what ports really represent. Ports are not just docking points for ships. They are choke points for trade, gateways for military logistics, and leverage in diplomatic negotiations. Whoever controls them can influence shipping costs, supply chains, and security cooperation far beyond national borders. That's why foreign powers compete so intensely over port access. In Africa, and especially in the Horn, ports are currency. Over the past decade, the UAE aggressively expanded its port footprint across Africa through logistics firms and long-term concession agreements. These weren't random investments. They were strategic moves designed to secure trade routes from the Middle East to Europe, protect energy flows, and project influence without deploying troops. Somalia became part of that equation. Port deals brought capital, expertise, and infrastructure upgrades, but they also created parallel power structures. In some cases, agreements were struck with regional authorities rather than central governments. In others, security arrangements blurred the line between commercial activity and geopolitical leverage. For a fragile state rebuilding sovereignty, that balance was always unstable. What changed is that Somalia is no longer in the same position it was a decade ago. The central government has been steadily reasserting authority over security, over revenue collection, and increasingly, over strategic assets. International recognition has improved, debt relief has advanced, and crucially, Somalia's leadership has begun acting from a position of calculated confidence rather than dependency. This port decision reflects that shift. By cutting off way control, Somalia is signaling that infrastructure access must align with national policy, not external interests. It's drawing a clear boundary between partnership and dominance, and that boundary matters because the Horn of Africa is no longer a quiet corner of global trade. It's one of the world's most contested regions. Look at the map. To the north sits the Red Sea corridor, one of the most vital shipping lanes on Earth. To the east lies the Indian Ocean, connecting Asia to Europe. To the west, instability in Sudan and the Sahel is reshaping security calculations. Every major power understands that control in this region translates into leverage far beyond Africa. That's why the way China, Turkey, the United States, and European powers all operate here, sometimes cooperatively, often competitively. Somalia's ports sit right in the middle of that competition. For years, the narrative was that Somalia had no choice but to accept whatever terms were offered, but that narrative ignores a key reality. Leverage doesn't only come from strength, it also comes from scarcity. There are only so many deep water ports in this region, only so many stable access points, and as global trade becomes more fragmented and security conscious, those access points become more valuable, not less. Somalia's leadership understands this. Canceling port deals doesn't mean rejecting foreign investment. It means renegotiating the terms under which influence is exercised. It's a declaration that access will no longer be automatic and that sovereignty is not negotiable. That's why the decision caught so many observers off guard. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it didn't involve sanctions or confrontational rhetoric. It was administrative, and that's exactly what makes it powerful, because quiet decisions are harder to reverse. From the UAE's perspective, this move disrupts long-term planning. Port concessions are designed to last decades. They underpin logistics networks and regional strategy. Losing control doesn't just affect revenue, it creates uncertainty across an entire system. From Somalia's perspective, the move recenters authority. It sends a message domestically that national assets are no longer fragmented, and internationally it communicates that Somalia expects to be treated as a negotiating equal. But this decision isn't happening in isolation. Across Africa, governments are reassessing old agreements, mining licenses, port concessions, energy contracts that were signed when leverage was weaker. The global environment has changed, competition among foreign powers has intensified, and that competition creates options. Options create leverage. What makes Somalia's case especially significant is its location. Unlike some resource disputes that affect only one sector, port control affects everything: trade, security, diplomacy, and regional alignment. That's why this move resonates far beyond Mogadishu. It raises uncomfortable questions for external actors. How many similar deals are now vulnerable? How many agreements assumed compliance that may no longer exist? And what happens when countries once considered dependent begin acting with confidence? For Somalia, the decision is a test. Reclaiming control creates responsibility. Ports must still function efficiently. Investment must still flow. Stability must be maintained. Sovereignty is powerful, but it requires competence to sustain, and that's where the next phase begins, because cutting off control is only the first step. What Somalia does next, who it partners with, how it structures access, and whether it balances openness with authority will determine whether this moment becomes a turning point or a temporary disruption. When control is withdrawn, a vacuum forms, and in geopolitics, vacuums never remain empty. Somalia's decision to cut off UAE port control didn't just end an agreement, it triggered a recalculation across the region. For every actor with interests in the Horn of Africa, the question shifted instantly from why the deal was cancelled to what happens next. Because whoever fills that space doesn't just gain access to docks and cranes, they gain influence over flows of goods, security coordination, and diplomatic alignment. The first response was silence. That silence mattered. There were no immediate countermeasures, no public ultimatums, no retaliatory statements that would escalate tensions. Instead, foreign governments and companies began quietly reassessing exposure, contracts, and alternatives. That's usually the sign that a decision hit closer to strategic planning than public narratives admit. 4. The UAE, the loss of port control isn't symbolic, it's structural. Port concessions are not short-term investments. They anchor logistics chains that stretch across continents. When one node is disrupted, the pressure propagates across routes, insurance costs, and scheduling reliability. Even a temporary disruption introduces uncertainty that competitors are eager to exploit, and competitors are watching closely. China doesn't need to make announcements. Its playbook is familiar: infrastructure-backed partnerships, long-term financing, and operational integration. Ports align naturally with its trade-driven strategy, especially in regions where maritime access defines economic connectivity. But China also understands timing, and rushing into a newly contested space carries risks. Turkey operates differently. It couples commercial presence with security cooperation, political visibility, and rapid project delivery. In Somalia, Turkey already has deep ties, making it a natural candidate for expanded involvement. But expansion brings expectations. More influence also means greater responsibility for stability. Western powers face a different dilemma. They speak of sovereignty, transparency, and good governance values that align with Somalia's move in theory. But in practice, rebuilding or replacing port operations requires sustained engagement, not statements. The question is whether political will matches strategic importance, and Somalia is aware of this imbalance. By asserting control first, Somalia reset the negotiation table. Any future partnership will occur on revised terms, centralized authority, clearer oversight, and conditional access. This shift alone changes bargaining dynamics, but reclaiming control also introduces immediate pressure. Ports must continue operating, trade cannot stop, revenue streams must be protected. That means Somalia must move quickly but not recklessly. Every delay invites speculation, every misstep invites doubt. This is where governance matters more than rhetoric. The Somali government faces a choice common to states undergoing strategic transitions: consolidate internally before opening externally, or leverage competition among partners to secure the best terms. Both approaches carry risks: too slow and confidence erodes, too fast and leverage is lost. Meanwhile, regional actors are recalibrating. Neighboring states are watching closely, not out of sympathy, but calculation. If Somalia successfully reasserts control without destabilizing trade, it sets a precedent. If it struggles, it becomes a cautionary tale. Either outcome influences future negotiations across the Horn. What complicates matters is that ports are not neutral assets. They are embedded in security ecosystems. Access agreements often include intelligence sharing, naval coordination, and emergency contingencies. Changing operators means revisiting those arrangements, sometimes quietly, sometimes contentiously. That's why this moment extends beyond economics. Security planners are assessing whether old assumptions still apply. Insurance firms are adjusting risk models. Shipping companies are updating routing algorithms. All of this happens behind the scenes, but it shapes outcomes more than headlines ever will. Somalia's move also intersects with a broader continental trend. Across Africa, governments are revisiting long-standing agreements signed under very different conditions, contracts negotiated when debt was high, options were limited, and leverage was thin. Today, competition among global powers has changed the equation. Options create confidence, confidence enables action. Somalia's decision fits neatly into that pattern. It doesn't reject foreign participation, it demands a renegotiation of terms, and that distinction matters. Foreign investors can work with sovereign states. What they struggle with is unpredictability. Somalia's challenge now is to demonstrate that sovereignty doesn't equal instability, that decisions once made are part of a coherent strategy rather than political impulse. That credibility will determine who shows up next. Already, exploratory discussions are rumored, some formal, others informal. No one wants to miss an opportunity, but no one wants to overcome it before the rules are clear. That hesitation gives Somalia leverage, but only temporarily. Windows close quickly in geopolitics. The global context adds pressure. Shipping routes remain vulnerable. Conflict in nearby regions raises insurance costs. Supply chains continue fragmenting. In this environment, reliable access points become even more valuable. That means Somalia's ports, properly managed, are more attractive than ever. But value attracts competition, and competition introduces complexity. Somalia must balance openness with control, speed with diligence, and ambition with capacity. Success would elevate its regional standing. Failure would reinforce old narratives that external actors are eager to resurrect. What makes this moment different is awareness. Somalia's leadership understands that the spotlight is on. They know this decision is being studied far beyond the way. Every move now becomes a signal to investors, to allies, and to rivals, and signals shape expectations. In geopolitics, expectations often become reality. The cut itself was sudden, the aftermath will be gradual. But it will be decisive. Because once control is reclaimed, it sets a standard, and standards once established are difficult to roll back. Somalia has crossed a threshold. What comes next will determine whether this was an isolated disruption or the beginning of a new phase where African states redefine how strategic infrastructure is governed, negotiated, and defended. The outcome won't be decided in press releases. It will be decided in contracts, cargo volumes, and the quiet choices made in boardrooms and ministries.